feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled TIFF review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, we're still talking TIFF, more almost 2 months, removed at this point.
Yeah.
So it shows that we still have plenty to cover when it comes to movies that are actually starting to get their theatrical release outside of the festival. Aftersun is the movie we're talking about here, written and directed by Charlotte Wells. It did get a limited release in New York and LA
Wow,
last week
I had no idea.
on
It's
October
almost like we've
21st.
recorded this once before.
It is opening in Ontario and other parts of Canada on October 28th in limited release, and will be expanding throughout the month of November.
Thank you for that, Eric. It's almost
No
like
problem.
you've said it before. It's almost
Deja
like you
vu.
said it before. What's up, everybody? Eric, how are you today?
I'm good, Matt. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. We're going to talk about, a pretty great movie today. A movie that, like you mentioned, saw 2 months ago.
We saw it more than 2 months ago. We saw that back in like late August,
Yeah,
early September.
maybe about 2 months. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
August, September, October. Yeah, probably it was like mid-August. But that has a movie that at first I was not lukewarm on, but I was kind of like, oh yeah, it was good. Um, but much like the movie itself, it's almost like you've already said this, but when you like sit on it and look back on it and think about it, it kind of resonates with you more, or you think about it in a different way. And when you were saying that in our last recording that we had to scrap, that hit me of how this movie hit me is like, okay, at first I was like, okay, yeah, that was a nice experience, much like this vacation she might have taken with her dad. And then when you look back at it, you think about it more and you revisit it, and it stuck with me, and I ended up, um, much like you'll talk about in a sec, but I kept going back to it, even though at first I was like, oh yeah, I think I enjoyed it, but it was one of the first movies we saw. I think it was maybe the first movie we saw. At least
It was one of the first. Yeah, definitely.
yeah, and it stuck with me, and I kept thinking about it. And some of the things that I thought were maybe trying too hard, I was like, you know what? After seeing all the other films I saw at TIFF and a lot of the movies I've seen this year, I'm like, okay, it wasn't trying too hard. It was just trying, and in a good way, of trying for metaphor and trying to be beautiful, and I think it accomplishes all that. So I'm excited to talk about this today with you.
Yeah, it's also, I think, we're going to talk about this with Armageddon Time as well. We've gotten to this point where in the last few years, even pre-pandemic, we've gotten a lot of autobiographies, semi-autobiographies, autofiction. We saw that, at TIFF with the Fablemans, Lady Bird, Minari. It's nothing new in terms of
Roma.
that. Roma. So there are tons of films in the last little bit that have had a filmmaker looking back at a moment in their life or a part of history that they're fond of, whether it be even something like Licorice Pizza.
Belfast.
Belfast, like all of these movies have kind of had a nostalgic kind of tinge on a moment in time that defined the filmmaker or something that they're longing for that maybe is no longer around. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a trend, and that's something I actually talked about with Charlotte Wells, having interviewed her, that this is such a personal passage that it comes from a place that is very sincere and emotionally resonant, and what she's able to convey on screen and able to connect with the audience is nothing short of astonishing. I think it's one of those movies where when you're watching it, it sneaks up on you in terms of how emotional that final 10-15 minutes
Yeah.
really is. And it is a very subtle movie, but it's also extremely assured in its style and its framing device, that when you're looking at it, you think to yourself, how is she able to balance this so perfectly? Because the control of the filmmaking, whether it be, coming in and out of focus, or reflecting on certain objects and having conversations while you're watching both the reflection and the conversation in the same scene. And then,
It's beautifully composed, right?
yeah,
Like the shot composition and just how it's executed. Yeah.
it's incredible. And then even the naturalistic kind of father daughter relationship that's at the center of this is so naturalistic and
Hmm.
lived in and real, and doesn't feel written in any way. So basically the crux of the story is, you have this framing device, which is the adult version of Sophie looking back at old video vacation footage from a late 90s trip at the end of summer at a Turkish resort, where the young Sophie, played by Frankie Corio, went on vacation with her father, played by Paul Mescal.
He's having a
Uh,
good couple years.
yeah, and also, like, someone made a reference online that, like, he went from one resort in The Lost Daughter to another resort in Aftersun,
Hmm.
going from Greece to Turkey. So with that, like, it's basically watching these two as, they spend a couple of you know I think it's about a week or so, sunbathing, swimming, kind of hanging out, watching hang gliders in the distance. Sophie's 11 in the late 90s, and so there is this metaphor to her being at that age where she's not quite yet at the teenage phase of her life, but she's not a child anymore. And there's a couple times in the film where you do see that in terms of a visual reference. One, when she's in a bathroom stall watching through a keyhole and listening to two girls that are older than her talk about relationships and stuff like that. And, being at this kind of water park and hanging out. But there's a melancholy that also is very much present, where we're seeing Callum, played by Paul Mescal, dealing with depression. And again, it never tries to explain what he's going through,
Yeah.
or diagnose what he's
Hmm.
going through. It
Or spoon feed
simply,
you or anything. Yeah.
yeah, it simply acknowledges and compassionately observes. And I think that's also an important thing there, because when you're watching young Sophie, she doesn't really clue into a lot of that. It's more from the perspective of the adult version, played by Celia Ralston Hall, who is, at the same age that her father was in those videos, and now she's starting to understand him a little bit more. But also, still, you still get the heartbreak and the compassion and empathy that, someone who has had many more experiences since then can extrapolate there. And watching this movie, it's nothing short of a masterpiece. For a feature length directorial debut, I think it is one of the finest I've ever seen. um I keep thinking about it, and it's one of those movies you just need to go and see for yourself, and honestly, like,
And
it
sit on it and like, cause you might,
ruminate. Yeah.
yeah. Cause I totally agree with you. And I've already kind of alluded to it where at first it didn't leave me cold or anything, but I feel like it maybe didn't hit me as hard as it maybe hit you in those final moments. And because it is a very subtle movie, you've already said that. Like it is, it is very stylish. We brought up the reflections and the shot composition, and it's very assured and naturalistic. But all of that leads to kind of just this moment in time movie where, yeah, it's not spoon feeding you anything. Yes, you clue in that he has depression, you clue into this father daughter relationship and her kind of looking back on it, but it kind of just presents all of that, and it doesn't have those typical kind of like dramatic moment or anything. It just kind of like happens, this like one little slice of life thing, but then looking back at life as a whole. And I think that that can leave you kind of going, huh, like at the end of just being like, was this, I don't want to, because I do think the movie's great, but I just feel like my initial reaction was just kind of like, okay, I've seen this movie before, father-daughter relationship, someone struggling with some problems kind of things. Um, and I said earlier that at my initial thought that it was trying a bit too hard with those, with the shot composition, I've kind of turned 360 on and gone, no, 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 that's actually, it made the movie kind of stylistically interesting while still resonating and things like that, and beautiful and actually thoughtful in its metaphors and things like that too. So I think it's one of those movies that you might need to see a second time or even just let it sit with you, because it can feel maybe so subtle that you kind of just, I don't know, maybe like how I felt after, where I'm like, oh, it was okay. But again, it sat with me, it stuck with me. I've thought about it. I've wanted to revisit it. I've gone, it's kind of crept its way up my top of TIFF list, where I'm maybe not in love with it as much as you are, but I still think it is quite great. But it is one of those movies that, you almost appreciate after you see it. And when I thought it was maybe too subtle for its own good by the end of it, I go, oh no, like, it doesn't need to kind of fall into those traps of, like, your typical kind of um movie about depression or about familial relationship and things like that. So yeah, it is excellent. It's really, really good.
Yeah, and you're kind of, as you're watching it, because the film is also, again, from the perspective of Sophie as an adult, it is filling in some of those narrative gaps when the characters are individually kind of doing their own thing,
Hmm.
and it's also trying to kind of, you know uh, come to a moment of catharsis and understanding. So some of it has this kind of surreal quality to it, where it's very much, like a memory frozen in time, the way that this Polaroid picture taken of the two together is.
Yeah,
And like, it makes so much sense that that was the starting point for this movie. A24 posted on their
the real
website
photo.
the real
Yeah.
photos, and so with that, it's like, holding on to a moment for as long as you can, and revisiting it from time to time, and reflecting on what your experience was like. And the more you live, the more you begin to contemplate and wonder what someone was going through, especially when you get to that person's age, or when you get to those milestones that your parents had, and thinking about that, and Callum being, you know a single dad who's quite young, and trying to figure out his stuff. There are moments where he talks about, I didn't think I'd make it to 30, and like that. It's just like things like that, or you're not thinking about it in that way, or when he's talking to Sophie about, you can always come to me and talk to me about anything, and I'll always be there to listen to you, and and those moments, especially on the second watch, really hit you even harder.
Yeah, because you
um
have seen this movie a second time, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's I was surprised with how much
I
of
feel like I'd like it even more a
yeah,
second time. Yeah.
I was surprised with how much of an impact it has on that second viewing, because you know where it's ultimately going, and kind of what, you know, quote unquote, the payoff is. But there again, there's something about finding those little moments that are building up to it, that kind of give you, a lot of people will be talking about the use of Queen featuring David Bowie's "Under Pressure," which I think is one of the best uses of that song ever, and it made me love Queen again. I finally have gotten over my Bohemian Rhapsody problems, so I just on that alone, I am so grateful to Charlotte Welch.
Half
But
star bump.
exactly. But I think, like, when you get to that moment, it's like everything hits you
Great
even
music.
harder a
I
second time.
I will just say.
And it's of the time, like
That's what I mean.
Aqua,
I feel
My Oh
like,
My,
yeah.
Brand Van 3000,
Which
which
we were her age during this
this
time,
period,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's why everything that, it just hit me really hard of everything that Sophie's kind of dealing with at this time, and like at this resort, the music that's playing, how she interacts with other kids and stuff like that. Like
Or
I
wants to hang out
really,
with older
yeah.
kids as well. Again, like, looking at that kind of like, okay, I'm not a quote unquote a baby anymore, but at the
So
same
yeah, I can
time,
play
like,
pool with these older kids and stuff
yeah,
like that. Yeah,
but
I
she
remember.
still is of that age where, like, she's not. a teenager yet. So
And
it's that awkward age group, you know.
And it's a great point of, like, I think I've said in a lot of these movies where not these movies, but it hits hard when they take place. It hits hard. It hits you harder because the time period, and we were her age during that time period, but now we're closer to Callum's age now. So you can
Yes.
kind of like, when it hits you on that double level of like, you can connect with the kid because you were a kid during that time, but now you connect with what the adults are going through because you're more their age. I think it I don't know, for me personally, just always kind of hits me really hard, and because you can kind of see it from both angles, and something I loved about this as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't really have a plot, so I can understand some people kind of maybe being turned off by the
That's, I
kind
think,
of
kind of what I
hangout
was
vibe where
saying. Yeah.
people could say that, like, oh, it's just too aimless, or
Yeah.
it feels like it doesn't it's not really going anywhere. But that's the whole point of this one being, like, when you go on a vacation to a resort, you're not doing anything, you're not really, like, you might go
There's no
to.
end game. It's just, hang out for a week and see what happens, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, and that's what this perfectly does, and it's so beautifully shot on 35 millimeter, and like
oh my god, we haven't even talked about that. It looks gorgeous. Yeah.
and it looks of the time, and I mean that as a compliment, because it looks archival and it works for that period where things were still being shot on film. So it feels like, she's watching it from the point of view of
A VHS tape, or yeah.
Panasonic
Yeah.
video recordings. But when you're watching it in the sense of, in her mind, her memory camera, you're seeing, it in real time, or how she remembers it, and how you remember something. We always talk about, you remember it fondly wearing, rose tinted glasses. Well, that adds to the look of the film, and watching it, you
I absolutely
understand,
agree. Yeah.
why the movie is shot the way it is, and why it's also using the video cam footage, and how it plays with both, and how it balances that out as well as it does with the framing device, and where the story goes. And it just, it washes over you in a way that, when you get to some of those moments that are more resonant than others, it feels like it comes together as a full piece, and you understand how personal a passage this is, while watching it, and just how deeply moved you become by the end of it, and how much it makes you empathize and feel for the characters, but also for Charlotte Wells. And like, I just felt like I was seeing her,
Mhm.
on the screen. And like, Frankie Cario, this is her first film, is an amazing discovery. Her acting alongside Paul Mescal, like, is incredible. It's just one of
Yeah,
those
she's great.
movies that I would recommend to anybody looking for something that's cathartic, and just really deeply moving. But again,
Yeah.
like, there are moments of levity too. Like, there's a great
Oh,
moment
it's
where you
fun at
see
times
a
too, right?
dad
Yeah.
dragging his kid and yelling at him, and it's like, that is
Oh,
also so
the
relatable.
again, the needle drops are fun, right? Like, there is even though the movie's very melancholy, like, I feel like it does have some fun moments, and even their relationship is very lovely. Even ultimately, looking back on it, it's tragic and sad, and everything too. But like, it's yeah, I think it has those moments that you will smile. It's not just a depressing movie all the way through, or just like, yes, you feel for Charlotte Wells, and I think that's something that I didn't clue until after the movie as well, right? Not knowing much about her, not knowing much about this story, like, just thinking it was not necessarily personal, and just, a movie about a father and daughter. And I think, like, that context, you should judge the movie for what it is, but I feel like when you bring that stuff into it too, it does kind of like change your perception of a movie, a lot of the times, which I think is totally fair. So like, even seeing that photo that A24 posted, and how similar it is, and how well casted the movie is, and like and things like that, just kind of added to it. And it is one of those movies, yeah, that has stuck with me, and that I do really, really want to watch again. I know I've been telling Nevis it's great, and I'm like, you got to see this movie. And I can't wait for people to check it out. And I hope people do. I know it'll be kind of one of those smaller movies that kind of probably flies under the radar for the most part. Like, it's probably not gonna, play in a ton of theaters. It's not going to get a lot of awards recognition or anything. Maybe
I
you're
hope
hoping.
critics groups do come through for
Yeah, and
it.
I think that's probably where you'll see it pop up, and whether, the DGA gives her a first time, like,
She's got to. I mean, it's one
director
of the best
nomination, like,
debuts
you
I've ever seen.
and I agree with you. So, like, you think if anywhere, like, not that any of that shit matters, but,
No.
it does help a small movie like this, even though it is A24, which is the biggest indie label or whatever, the most, that will put it out there and try to get people to go see it. But I do think it is one of those kind of subtle, quiet, like, just like the movie, like, it will
Yeah.
kind of go under the radar. Um, so yeah, well, I mean, you'll be a big champion of it, and I will definitely tell people to check it out if they want something. I think we talked about Tar, right? And Tar and Aftersun both, cinephile movies for the most part, right?
They're
And like
austere,
they're
but they're austere in
yeah,
different ways with how
yeah.
they handle. I mean, obviously, much different subject
Very
matter.
different, very different. But you know what I mean by like a movie that you kind of know who to suggest it to, right?
Yes.
Like, that's kind of what I mean. So like I know who I like who to say, hey, go see After Sun. You'll really love it. When, I do think there will be, if someone just randomly went to their multiplex and went to go see this, like you said, you could go, oh, it's aimless. Oh, what was that even the point? Or, it does spell out what sort of what happens, but it's not very plot driven, right? Like it is more about it's character driven, and it's very very subtle. So yeah, I really love the movie. Um, I'm teetering between. I think I am gonna give it a 4.5. I think it's great.
Yeah. Again, one of the best movies of the year. One of the greatest directorial debuts I've ever seen. Um, Continue to
That's
think
high
about it.
praise.
It's worth it though. It's one of those movies where it's like, you every once in a while you see a filmmaker or you see their first film, and you kind of realize like, oh, this person has amazing potential, but also is telling
Absolutely.
such a full and rich and putting their heart and soul, on display. And sometimes that can also be perceived as pretentious, because like
Yeah.
a movie that it also reminded me of a little bit, like after rewatching it a second time, another movie I absolutely love is Sarah Pauli's Stories We Tell, which is about her family, where it's like,
Uh
okay,
huh.
well, you're being narcissistic or egotistical, focusing this story on your family, but the story she's telling in that movie is so captivating.
Well, we
And
had a
you
whole conversation off air about that, right? About
Yeah.
this, what we said, whether you want to call it a trend or just directors kind of looking back at their own lives and feeling like it's important enough to put onto film, right? Where something like After Sun feels so personal, and it doesn't feel like, oh, this is so important, I need to tell you about it, more so than like, I needed to put this on, like, I needed to get this out kind of thing, right? And
Yeah.
it is one of those movies that I feel like is so incredibly stylish, but still reserved. Not reserved is the right
There
word,
is
but
there
like
there is there
restrained. Like it's
restraint, yeah.
like it shows restraint, but is still like oozing with style, which is a very hard thing to kind of pull off.
Yeah.
Where I feel like to really put in a lot of that kind of the different shots about reflections and just how beautiful the movie looks while still feeling subtle and restrained is kind of a tricky thing. And like, because it could come off as pretentious, it could come off as too subtle, which it is kind of dancing on all of that, but then weirdly kind of all comes together into this really beautiful kind of touching thing that doesn't feel like, hey, my story's so important, this needs to be a movie, more so than like I'm putting my heart and soul into this, and it's worthwhile, and it definitely is. So you
Yeah,
didn't
and
rate it yet. 5,
no,
I'm assuming, or what?
let me finish with this. It feels like a stream of her subconscious being
Yeah.
projected on the big screen, and that is the highest praise I can give anybody when it comes to being able to articulate something that is so deeply personal
Yeah.
and very private, and something that has a lot of weight to it, coming from somebody that you know is a first time feature length filmmaker, but also trying to tell a story that you hope that everybody else can find something in, and not just be completely personal.
Yeah.
And it does, and it is a 5-star movie.
That's an
100%.
perfect score.
Yeah.
You don't get many of those. I mean, you kind of do sometimes, but I don't. I never know what we even rate things after these podcasts are done. Whoosh, don't remember.
Yeah.
Um,
But having watched it twice now, I'm very happy giving this a
oh,
5-star
I'm
review.
happy.
So
I could get there. I do. I will watch this again before awards voting for us for CCA stuff, but I'm excited to check it out again. So, thank you all for listening or watching. We really, really do appreciate it. We will be trickling out more TIFF reviews over the next little while as these films are finally being released to the public. But you can check out our other TIFF reviews for things like How to Blow Up a Pipeline, The Greatest Beer Run Ever. What else do we got?
Glass
Pearl,
Onion,
Women
The
Talking.
Fableman.
Yep. Glass Onion, The Fablemans, Triangle of Sadness, Banshees of Inisherin, The Whale, Empire of Light, Bros, Brother, Weird, The Al Yankovic Story. We just recorded something. What the hell did we record, Eric?
We just recorded a review for The Good Nurse.
Okay. I was like, am I frozen or no?
You are
No.
frozen,
Okay,
yes.
god damn it. We're trying new things. I don't know if this is frozen on your end, guys, if you're watching on YouTube, but we'll figure that shit out. Anyways, I'm gonna wrap.
You're
Go check out.
frozen in time like a memory.
Go check out all of our other shows over on our main channel, which is Untitled Movie Podcast. We have a couple new episodes about different things like I'm like
Oh, you're back.
blanking now.
You're
I'm
back.
back. Oh, see, like, yeah, I don't know if that's on the video side is gonna fuck up or not. I think because I'm trying out. See, everyone, I'm trying out a new. If you're on YouTube, hey, you can see my computer and
Behind the
like,
scenes.
I'm trying this new on the new Apple update. They have it's called continuity camera, and you can use your iPhone, which I've been using on through Elgato recently, but Apple has it now. Obviously, some kinks to work out, but we'll get through it. One-stop shop for everything, easiest spot. Just go to Untitled_movies at Letterbox. That's probably the easiest place to find us. But YouTube, podcast services, all that jazz, and then follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene. I don't want to come off as pompous, but I truly do feel the interview I did with Charlotte Wells is one of the best things I've ever
Hell
done.
yeah, go listen to it, everyone.
And
Or watch
so
it.
just listen to her talk. I think, when you, especially if you see the movie first and then watch this interview and like understand that what she's saying comes from a place that is truly so personal, and like just listening to her, it was a beautiful experience, and so I'm so grateful for that. And you can follow me on the social medias at em6211.
Until next time.
Drinking in LA at 26. Sly, Vic, Sly. Yeah, getting mighty thirsty out there.